But let me first introduce our first speaker. So thank you for all being here. Our first speaker is Dr. Jennifer Gatchel. She's a rising star in our division of geriatric psychiatry at Mass General. She has a unique and rare set of expertise. She's a physician scientist who's board certified in geriatric psychiatry and dually trained in both medicine and neuroscience. She can really bridge the bench to the bedside extraordinarily well. She got her MD and PhD at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. And her clinical research is focused on understanding the links between mental health, memory decline, and Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. She's working on improving treatments for older adults in depression, with depression and anxiety, and to promote brain and memory health, with the ultimate goal of preventing dementia. And I'm very excited about her work because she really wants to develop new therapies, new pharmacological therapies, to really address these important problems. So she'll talk to us today about the possible connections between late life depression and dementia. Does depression predict dementia is the topic of her presentation. Please welcome Dr. Jennifer Gatchel.
Thank you, Maurizio, for that introduction. Good morning and welcome. Thank you to Mrs. Kessler, Mr. and Mrs. Kessler, Michelle and Carol, and the Leadership Council, the MGH Department of Psychiatry and the Development Office, for the opportunity to be here this morning to tell you a little bit about my work focused on the question of whether or not depression may be a harbinger of dementia. Next slide. So I was only 12 or 13 when I first started going to doctor's appointments with my grandparents. So I grew up very closely with my Nana Rose and Grandpa Tony, and they were both Italian immigrants. And so I remember my earliest memories of those days were kind of the smells and the feels of rolling out homemade pasta with my grandmother and smelling homemade gravy and meatballs each week. As I grew up, my grandparents aged alongside with me. And with that came increasing trips to their doctor's appointments. And one particular experience and doctor's visit really stood out for me and having a lasting impact on my career trajectory from that point forward and what's become my life's work. And so that happened around the time this picture was taken, so around maybe the second or third year of high school. And so over this time period, just over a few months, my grandmother, my Nana Rose, who was a very vibrant woman who would be running around teaching me how to make clothes and design clothes, suddenly over the course of just a few months, we noticed a really rapid change in her. So she started to move much more slowly, to even trip over her steps. Her face became somewhat frozen in nature. She began to talk more slowly, and eventually she almost lost the ability to swallow. So you can imagine how frightening this was for not only her, but our entire family. At that point, none of us had a background in medicine, so we had no idea what was going on. At that point, we lived in Austin, Texas, and we were very fortunate to be connected with a neurologist in Austin. And so I remember very distinctly our interaction with that neurologist, not only on that initial visit, but in the subsequent years. And a couple of things stood out for me. The first thing that was most profound was just his way of interacting with my grandmother. I remember him bending over, looking at her in the eyes, holding her hand, kind of taking extra time to explain what he thought was going on, not only to her, but to our entire family. So he explained to us that what he observed and what he thought was going on in terms of the diagnosis was Parkinson's disease. And he also spent the time telling us what that meant, what the treatment options were. And so again, this had a profound impact not only on that day, but as Parkinson's progressed for my grandmother. Now, also another thing that stood out as the years went on is that, as we all know, that there's a lot that we can do in medicine in terms of these human connections and treatments for patients, but there are significant gaps in what we can do for mental health issues and neurological issues. So as we know, there are no cures for diseases like Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease or even depression. At most, we have therapies that can slow the progression of these processes, but they're by no means definitive cures. And so indeed, as the years progressed, my grandmother's Parkinson's progressed. She developed more movement symptoms, eventually developed memory and thinking changes, and also significant depression and anxiety. So that experience really shaped my subsequent training in school as I went on to, it made me decide that I wanted to be not only a physician, but also a scientist, so to be able to fill these gaps in medical knowledge so we can do more for patients and their families. And so I went on to do this, to study medicine and science at Baylor College of Medicine, to study psychiatry residency at Mass General Hospital, to pursue a geriatric psychiatry fellowship at Mass General, all with the eye on kind of considering how can we better understand brain changes in aging to help individuals age gracefully, so that the golden years can truly be golden for individuals like my grandmother and others like her. So currently at Mass General, I spend about a day of my week seeing patients who have a wide range of symptoms of depression, memory and thinking changes, a combination of those things, and really trying to meet them where they are to give my best estimate of their diagnosis and to give recommendations for treatment. And the rest of my week is spent training the next generation of geriatric psychiatrists and also pursuing clinical research questions that are motivated by what I observe in patients and their families and motivated by what I observed in my own family. And one of the most interesting and profound questions that I've been focusing on that I want to tell you a little bit about is the link between late life depression and dementia. And specifically, in some cases, can depression precede dementia and can it act as an accelerant, so stepping on the brakes for a process of dementia? So this is an incredibly important question because the prevalence of late life depression and Alzheimer's disease are quite high, and they're only going to continue to rise with the aging population. So currently, 15 to 40% of older adults above the age of 60 have some form of depression. And we consider late life depression as that occurring in those above 60. Now, when did we consider 60 late life? That seems pretty young to me, but that's how we define it kind of in the scientific terms. That's how it's studied scientifically. And then nearly 6 million in the US today are living with Alzheimer's disease, dementia. And that's not including the nearly 16 million that are serving as caregivers for loved ones with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. So take a step back so we're all on the same page here. So what do we mean by late life depression? So again, that would be occurring in individuals above the age of 60. So that could include individuals who have aged with depression, who've had depression throughout their life. It could also include those who've had the first episode of depression in late life. Now, clinically, we use the same diagnostic criteria for older adults as for teenagers or midlife individuals, for depression. But depression can actually look very different in an older adult. So one of the first patients that I actually had at Mass General in my clinic was a woman who was in her 70s, and so she came into the visit, and she wasn't coming in crying and tearful and kind of saying that she felt depressed, but instead she was really coming in kind of more withdrawn. Was complaining more of like pain, medical problems, memory problems. And it was only after speaking with her family and them reporting that she had previously been very active, going to play tennis, going to social engagements, and had really withdrawn from all of those things, that we were able to make a diagnosis of depression and to recommend a treatment which was ultimately effective for her. And then what do we mean by dementia? So dementia is really any significant change in memory or another thinking function that is severe enough to impact day-to-day function. So I don't know about you, but I have lapses in memory all the time. So this morning I forgot when our shuttle was departing, or I forgot where my hotel keys were. And so, and we all have these lapses, and that does not mean that we have dementia or that we're going to get dementia. And so instead, we become concerned about memory or thinking changes when they become consistent changes. When they become a departure from our previous level of memory and thinking, and when they become severe enough that they are impacting our day-to-day function. So even with additional supports, we can't really compensate for these changes in memory and thinking. So that's when we start to think about, could this be a worrisome change in memory and thinking? So now, the link between depression and dementia. So in the most basic level, we can all recognize that how our mood likely will affect our thinking, our memory function. So if we're not feeling our best, we might not be at our sharpest in terms of our thinking, and vice versa. But we're specifically trying to understand that in some cases of late life depression, the depression be an early sign of dementia, and again, might it be stepping on the brakes for accelerating the process of dementia. So let me tell you a little bit about how we're approaching this question. So we're able to do this with a really cool technology that is in part the advancement of neuroimaging. So the way that we can take pictures of and visualize the brain in living individuals So this has advanced incredibly through the past century, from X-rays to CTs and MRIs. So how many of us have had MRIs or CT scans? This can be common clinically. And also most recently, PET scans in 2000 came on board. And so through PET scans, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about, these scans allow us to measure or detect specific proteins or deposits in the brain. Some of these deposits occur in normal aging in all of us, and some of them may occur in a more exaggerated way in processes like dementia. So in a PET scan, as shown in the far right, these deposits will light up like lights on a Christmas tree in terms of where the deposits are located and how much are present. And so they're like in the dark red, in the bright red and yellow, are where most deposits are present. So at MGH, we're uniquely positioned to ask this research question about whether depression may precede and accelerate dementia. Because we have two specific PET technologies that we've kind of developed at Mass General, including PET scans that can detect two of the proteins that are hallmarks or signature proteins for Alzheimer's disease dementia. And these two proteins are amyloid, shown in the top panel, and tau, shown in the bottom panel. So these are scans of an individual, and this is basically if we took a section of my brain like this, and we looked at one half, the front half of my brain, that's what we're kind of visualizing there, and the top amyloid and the bottom tau. And you can see this is an individual without depression, but we know now that as memory changes progress from someone being normal to having mild decline to dementia, we see more of these deposits occurring. Now, we're also uniquely positioned at Mass General to address this question because we have a group of older adult volunteers in the Harvard Aging Brain Study. This is a group of over 300 individuals who are living in the community in the Boston or related areas, and they entered the study when they were 60 or above, and they come in yearly and sometimes more frequently for visits where we ask them challenging memory and thinking questions, challenging tests of their memory and thinking. And we also take scans of their brain each year. And so we're able to track, and we ask them questions about their mood. So we're able to track when is depression occurring, when are memory and thinking changes occurring, what do their brains look like through this process. And also now at Mass General, we're developing ways to be able to measure these proteins through blood draws, which I can maybe tell you a little bit more in the panel, which would be a really game changer in terms of how accessible these tests could be. So what we're finding in brief is that, this is data that we have from the Harvard Aging Brain Study, that more depression goes with more tau in the brain. And this is in normal individuals who don't have dementia, so are living in the community and functioning normal. More depression goes with more tau. We also know that more depression, when more amyloid is present, goes with memory decline. So you can see the increasing amounts of amyloid there in the scans and the worse memory performance. So together, our findings are telling us that at least in some individuals with depression in late life, these symptoms may actually be early signs of an Alzheimer's disease type process. So why might that be important, and where do we want to go from here? Why could this? So we're very excited about this because it brings us back to the ultimate goal that Maurizio mentioned. We want to prevent dementia, and we want to decrease the burden of depression. So again, these conditions are hugely debilitating. They're public health crises. And so, Alzheimer's disease dementia, if we don't develop ways to slow it or to prevent it, the numbers will rise to almost 20 million by the year 2050, which is staggering. So we believe, based on the approach that I've described, by moving research forward in this way, that we can better prevent depression and kind of slow the process or prevent dementia in some individuals, in part by measuring brain biology, measuring profile of clinical symptoms in a really targeted and personalized way, developing tailored treatment for the individual. So indeed, in some individuals, there may not be a one-size-fits-all approach. So a standard antidepressant or Prozac may not be sufficient in the aging brain in the context of specific protein depositions to treat that depression and prevent dementia. So that's where we'd like to go with this, through developing a really unique and cutting-edge integrated clinical research program at MGH, a mood and memory clinical research program, where we can introduce a personalized way to address individual neurobiology. And then also, as Maurizio mentioned, to really move forward models of care. So access to care, integrated team-based care, is lacking in this area. And so we know that dementia, depression affect more than neurobiology. So they have huge impacts on patients and family in terms of psychological burden, financial burden, medical illness burden for patients and caregivers. So we need to do better than what we're doing currently, and we believe that we're poised to do so at Mass General through moving this research forward. So no family goes untouched, and my Nana Rose eventually lost her battle with Parkinson's disease. And I can only hope, I only wish that the last few years of her life had better quality. Now, I do hope that with some of the research initiatives and the care models that we described, that we can do better for other patients and families in the future, and that indeed we need to do better. So thank you all for your attention. I want to acknowledge the research volunteers who have come into the Harvard Aging Brain Study that make this work possible, my co-investigators in the study. Again, acknowledge the Psychiatry Leadership Council for hosting this wonderful event and for all of your support of these initiatives, for my mentors in the Department of Psychiatry and the Development Office, and for funding sources. I also want to say, although we're poised to do more in the future, there are things that we can do, all do now already to promote mental health, that promote brain health. And we can talk more about that at the panel discussion. And then we also have a kind of little mnemonic here that we can hand out if you'd like to take something home with you to kind of jog your memory about what you can do to promote positive brain health. Thank you.